My name is Chris Marx. I was born in Germany. I moved to the United States when I was 21, furthered my career as a professional musician. I was a guitarist and bass player in several LA-based hard rock, heavy metal bands. Then switched career paths over to law enforcement. At some point, became a deputy sheriff, ultimately a sheriff's sergeant, focused on investigations, visited a lot of schools, and furthered my overall expertise in that line of work. From there, I became a bodyguard in Los Angeles, executive protection to several of the high-level LA business people, as well as some of the Hollywood stars and celebrities and you name it. Did that for several years, got tired of it. It ultimately, kind of got burned out on it. Joined the US military police corps and deployed to Iraq in 2007. I did 2 tours consecutively. The first one centered on transport of high-value targets by land and air from Qasr, Basra, to Baghdad, and then returning in late 2009. Didn't have a job at that point. I took time and just crossed the US on my Harley Davidson and reconnected with normal life, I guess. It was great. I came back, still didn't have a job, and the money was dwindling that I had earned during the 2 years of combat deployment. So I needed to do something, looking for a job, and I just couldn't find anything that I really wanted to do. And then I came across an ad by Bigelow Aerospace that they were looking for team members for their security at Bigelow Aerospace in Las Vegas. So I applied to that. I got an offer back, interviewed, and during the interview, it was determined that I was not going to be working for aerospace, but at this point, undisclosed sister company. I think the interview went well. I got the job. Still didn't really know who I was working for because that wasn't told to me. I was asked if I could deploy 2 weeks at a time. I asked, sure, where to? I was advised that I would know once I was hired. I said, okay, cool. I mean, I'm in. Always looking for an adventure or two, and hey, sounded great to me. So I got hired on, and it turned out to be BAASS. Never heard of BAASS. BAASS stood for Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies. I had never heard of them. I had no idea what their focus was or what their broader, spectrum. I had no idea what they were doing. So I got hired. I spent the first week at the central hub on Polaris. It was class building. It was quite impressive. I spent the first week in the library there just to kind of get up to speed, what they were doing and what it was all about, and I was amazed. I mean, the books in there and the journals and photography was just off the chart. I have no doubt that Roswell happened. I've seen the actual reports on it that were in this library, the pictures, the investigation, the reports of people that actually were on scene, and the pictures that they took when they first came on scene. That stuff wasn't photoshopped. And then I came across a lot of journals about a place called Skinwalker Ranch, which also I had never heard about. And the more I read about it, the more I was fascinated by this place, and it seemed to be like a paranormal be-all, end-all. And having had experiences prior in New Mexico, having had experiences basically from childhood on I've always been wired a little different as far as that, and I think I'm probably some sort of an antenna into this. There are people that are far more developed than I am, but I think that I always had a niche for this type of stuff.
So what else was in the journals specifically with regard to the ranch? Were they reports? Were they...
There were a lot of reports. There were chronicles. There were pictures. There were investigative reports going back to NIDS, going into BAASS, which I guess had been formed just prior to me joining in 2010. There were a lot of journalings and drawings and pictures of tracks, pictures of cattle mutilation, eyewitness reports, interviews that they had conducted with neighbors in the community, with people in the community. And it was mind-blowing. It was really, really mind-blowing. And the more I read, the more I got really kind of drawn into, I wanted to see this for myself.
Did you think a majority of the reports were, was it some sort of, did you get the impression there was some sort of threat?
No, it was, at that point, no, there was no threat. It was simply a documentation of what had been learned, what had been experienced. There was no conclusion to any of this. It wasn't like trying to explain what it was. It was simply a witness account from a lot of different people that had experienced different things. Some of them were the same or along the same lines. Some of them were different, but there were a lot of just witness accounts. There was no agenda. There was no threat. There was no jumping to conclusions. It was very scientifically based.
What made you decide to come forward?
That's actually a pretty good question, and I asked myself that a few times ever since. I guess, looking back, when I came back from Afghanistan in 16, the ranch had been sold, the company had been dissolved, BAASS that is, and I didn't really think much about it again. I mean, it was just something that was in my past, something that I had thoroughly enjoyed doing. Probably the best job I've ever had in my life. It was more than a job, it was a passion. And every once in a while, I looked at pictures of the ranch, reread some of my reports when I came across them in the office when I was doing something else. It would always refocus me. So it was somewhere in the back of my mind, but never really anything that I had planned on doing anything with. Aside the fact, what do you do with that? It's ancient history. So I was sitting at my kitchen, had lunch, just a few months back. And I don't have TV, so I watch YouTube videos every once in a while just to look at something when I'm eating. And this documentary trailer came on automatically. And I thought it was interesting, so I started watching it. And I saw the trailer, it was only like 6 minutes, 5-6 minutes long, but it really awoke something in me. It really upset me. The way the ranch was portrayed was not the way the ranch is. And to me, it is a very special place, a very sacred place. It's a place that is full of wonders. And all I saw on this trailer was threat, and special effects, and people that are experts, so proclaiming to be experts, that in my 6 years on the ranch, I have never seen up there. I don't even know who these people are, but they all seem to be ranch experts, and they all were retelling third-party tales. The same tales they've been retelling for the last 20 years. It's regurgitation of the same information, of the same. Now that the only difference is we seem to be progressing on adding more and more on special effects, on opinion, on threat levels, on painting a picture that is not accurate. And it woke me up. I needed to do something. I felt like I needed to do something to set the record straight, because the way this was going, it's like, what's next? Are we going to do human sacrifices in the bait pens or something crazy? I mean, all these rumors that were flying out there about the black limousines, which were really enterprise rent-a-cars that we rented on Rancho Boulevard, because they had the capacity to transport gear and had cruise control, and they just happened to be Suburbans and Tahoes that they had, down to the stories of we put pregnant women in bait pens, or we had a shootout where people got killed with aliens. How ridiculous can it get? Then so I saw the trailer, and I decided that I wanted to just simply set the record straight. I wanted to do something that would explain, or just not even explain, but to show the narrative from a first-hand perspective, from somebody that's actually been there, somebody that's actually worked it, somebody that's actually investigated it. Not this, I heard this from that person who told this person, and all of a sudden you got this telephone game. So I decided I wanted to go at it and correct the record. And I was hoping by me doing so, it would put all the fluff away for good, and all the commercialization. I mean, it's so commercialized anymore that people that have not really set foot on this place, other than a minute here and a minute there, are having built empires, financial empires out of this. Selling the same old threat, the same old negativity, and I was just done with this. So I wanted to do something that would explain, or simply tell a witness account. That's all I've ever been doing. I got away from the thought of I could find a smoking gun after year number 1 on the ranch, because it is not possible. NITS couldn't do it, BAASS couldn't do it, and I sure as hell couldn't do it. There is no smoking gun. There are a lot of different entities that are on this property of totally different natures, different characters. So I focused on simply documenting what I saw. I tried to be as accurate and as detailed and as scientific in this as I could be. I stayed away from conclusions. I stayed away from assumptions. I went into all of this with a really clear mind, simply documenting what I observed and doing it to the best of my ability with what I had. So I started, after watching this trailer, I bought myself a Chromebook, refurbished, and started typing just what came to mind about the ranch. And 3 days in, I realized I was actually sort of writing a book on this. And the idea wasn't I wanted to put something out just to put another book on the market, but at the same time I wanted something out there that would rectify the madness, that would put to a halt these crazy tales of blood and guts, of threat and the doomsday and all that madness. Because the ranch is a very sacred place. It's a very beautiful place. It's a place that's to be enjoyed with caution, no doubt. There are situations out there where one has to be sensitive to its environment. It's a place like no other, at least that I've ever been on. It's a place that is very, very sacred and has been for hundreds of years. The witness accounts of things happening in the basin are going way, way back. I don't even know when it first started, but I was glad to be in part of it, and I wanted to simply document that.
So you had an experience up there with a shapeshifter. Can you talk a little bit about what led to that event?
Sure. It's nothing. Before I actually get into this, I want to caution that this is not something that I just kind of pulled out of thin air. This event had been something that took probably like a couple of years in the makings. This was nothing that I just went and did, something that just happened. By cautioning, I mean, I've heard of several accounts of people that have tried to replicate this, especially since I came forward on the radio show. And people are trying to do this type of stuff, and it is not without risk. It is, I've had my pitfalls with it. I paid my dues. I had knowledge a little bit about dabbling into that type of material, and I safeguarded all I did the best I could, and some of it didn't work so well. But I want to just caution people to not just stumble into something like this, because it does have consequences. There are consequences to this, and I still am having consequences for that. For example, random crashes in my kitchen that happen once a week or so, where it sounds like the whole kitchen is emptying itself out and nothing's been touched. There are occurrences where items I place someplace are still misplaced in my own home.
And this was very common, we reported with the people that worked on the ranch. This happened to all of them.
And it's still happening to some. I've just gotten in touch with some of my old ranch buddies from BAASS, and since I came forward, it seems like there are a few that are coming forward, and we've been talking, and we are comparing the today. It's like, hey, anything going on in your house, or do you have any weird dreams? I mean, what used to be something we never talked about because it was just something that was unspoken, it almost was a sign of weakness of a sort. Now we're talking, and come to find out, this is not just something that's happening to me, but it's happening to others that I worked with on the ranch and I hadn't talked to in years.
And this is the type of thing that needs to be documented. If anybody was really truly adept at researching all of these things, all of these personal experiences would be documented and collected by a researcher.
Certainly. And I know that I'm chronicling mine. I know that others that I work with are doing the same and have been. Come to find out, there are actually journals that exist at this point of some of us that have kept record of what happened after. Not just during, but after. And it appears that there are a lot of similarities. Matter of fact, it's almost identical. So it's not just me, it is others as well. It's a handful of others that I've been talking to just very recently that have contacted me again and wanting to share their experiences. I know the characters of these people because I've worked with them for years. So I vouch for every single one of them because they are not pulling things out of thin air. And I can verify because it's happening to me as well.
So you had spent time on the ranch, you spent time out there. with no sleeping bag or with no tent. You were out in the middle of the property at night with no flashlights. You wanted to kind of assimilate into the environment and get to know what you were dealing with,
Right.
the entities there. So over a few years, you pulled into some occult practices to try to figure out and engage whatever it was. Tell us about that experience, what you did.
See, we did a lot of just scientific experiments, such as trying to measure electromagnetic frequencies, electromagnetic pulse, photography, cameras, all kinds of measuring equipment. And it appeared that while we were getting some results, most of it did not deliver what we had hoped it would deliver. So it seemed like we were trying, since our goal was to communicate. Now it was communicating. For example, when we had lined up 8 computers to measure electromagnetic frequency at a certain location on the ranch, it would repeat itself that batteries were depleted within a minute of all 8 at the same time, and we wouldn't get the result that we had hoped for at the same time. The ranch communicated because it shut it down. Something shut it down, and it was shut down. We tried to run this experiment for a week straight. We went, recharged the computers, hooked them back up with the same result every single time. At some point, BAASS shifted gears. We introduced a different way of going at it. And this is what really sort of opened the door, where I could now go forward with things I had already begun dabbling in and trying to produce communication. So yes, I would cross the ranch at 2 in the morning, not using any kind of artificial light. I would sleep out in the East Valley, a place that I deemed to be safe. It had entities in it, but they were entities that felt right to me. It was a place where I had accidentally dozed off on just even afternoon excursions. When I sat there, I felt so full of, it was peaceful, it was very calming. And even in the beginning, the very beginning, without even having, I hadn't planned on any of this, I would go out for a day tour, hiking the ranch, and I had my camera, I had my equipment, and I always would end up at the East Valley. And eventually I came to the point where I felt so comfortable in that area that I dozed off. And I would, the first couple of times, wake up thinking, oh my God, what just happened? I actually fell asleep out here. And then it became more and more almost like a routine, where I started thinking about this, and I had some dreams about it. I had very vivid dreams while sleeping out there. And like real, I mean, it seemed like real. And so essentially I took that a step further, and I figured if I open myself to the entities in that location, the best way to do this is by sleep, because all my defense mechanisms are going to be pretty much disabled. My mind is going to be wide open, and I am opening myself to the whatever's out there. And I would always go in, I would ask for permission to enter. I would, out loud, I would explain my reasoning. I would always state that I'm here to learn. I want to become part and understand of what is here. I don't mean any harm or threat. I simply want to learn and be enlightened of what is going on and communicate. I always wanted to communicate. And so I went out there. It was kind of little, nerve-wracking at first, but I would bring a sleeping bag and I would sleep out in the East Valley. And I felt more and more comfortable doing that. And I started learning to relax, to totally relax, to open my mind, to open my soul, to open everything to communicate with it. So that went on for a while. And then BAASS introduced a Ouija board type experiment that we did, which was unheard of prior. So now we were going into that direction. And I thought, wow, that's actually pretty cool because I've already got sort of a head start in this because I've done the sleepovers and I've done the meditations. Did a lot of meditating out there and just tried to focus on the energy that is out there. It's a very unique area, very unique in a lot of different ways. There's a history to this place, to that particular part of the ranch. And so when we went into the whole Ouija thing, what we had done was to get a little bit into the background of this. The ranch, there were two ranch administrators that were running the experiments and running the overall ranch activities. They had come up with the idea of identifying 15 or so hotspots that we all could agree on were hotspots. One of the ranch administrators and I walked the property, and we didn't, with the whole goal of identifying to see if he had the same ideas of a hotspot than I would. So we didn't talk about locations, we didn't talk about anything, we were just quiet walking the entire ranch and making notes. So after we got back, about 2.5 hours of hiking, we compared notes and come to find out that he and I had identified 13 of the very same hotspots. So then they drew up 13 questions that were sealed into 13 evidence envelopes that were tamper-proof, and we placed those in those locations, in the 13 locations. So 13 envelopes, 13 locations. Then when we had turnover on Wednesday nights, we would congregate the old team that was there, the new team coming in, the two ranch admins, and then the caretaker. There were 7 of us. And we would set up audio and video equipment from different angles. There was a Ouija board that was designed by BAASS that essentially focused on those 13 envelopes. So a typical session would be, what's in envelope number 1? Or what's the answer to the question in envelope number 1? What is the answer to the question in envelope number 2? And so forth. Only one of the ranch admin guys knew the answers, the one that authored them. Nobody else knew what the questions were or what the answers could have been. So interestingly enough, things started happening, but not what we thought was going to happen, but a whole different way of communication. So we got this actually from different angles, and I trust that BAASS still has those tapes. So we set up the board, and we had the planchette in the center, and even before we started, it would lift up and it would fly. It would actually fly and hit me in the chest. I know that sounds crazy, but we have it actually filmed. This happened 3 times in a row. every time we were asking a question. Then I thought, or we thought, maybe this has to do with some electromagnetism or magnetic something in the house that would cause this. So I would like transfer chairs. I would sit, in a different chair. There were 4 chairs around the table. We conducted this in the kitchen area of our double wide up there. And the same thing would repeat itself. And so eventually I had traveled all 4 chairs and the results were the same. The planchette would lift and fly and land up in my lap. For whatever reason that I can't even explain. I don't even know what happened. But it was observed by 7 people. It was taped by 2 cameras and there was audio to this. So it's there. So I thought maybe there's something else I can do with this. And I started doing these sessions by myself. And I had the ranch caretaker there present with me. And now I combined the sleeping out in the East Valley, meditation, and Ouija. And I didn't just do a random Ouija. What I would do was I addressed JW, who is a person that had chiseled his initials into a rock wall or rock face of the ranch, along with several Masonic symbols and his rank. He was a 33rd degree ancient Mason. I believe that he was part of the Buffalo soldiers that were deployed to the ranch area to Fort Duchesne, first brigade ever deployed into a crisis area, which back then there, I guess, were a lot of fighting between Native American tribes. So I figured, he's military, I'm military, there's a connection. I figured maybe if we can speak soldier to soldier, that I'd be somewhat okay in doing this. I thought about it for a while before I actually did it. I thought this through. I figured, how can I safeguard? How can I make sure it's really him I'm going to be talking to, if I talk to anybody at all? Which, you just don't know what, on those things, you just don't know what's going to happen. So I wrote out 30 questions. And I started with self-identifying stuff, such as, what's my name? What's my date of birth? When did I come to the ranch? What did I do this morning? What did I do this afternoon? How many dogs do I have here? I mean, just stuff that was easily verifiable, and trying to establish somewhat of a genuine conversation. I videotaped it as well, and audio taped it. And I started my questions. The caretaker was there as a human witness to it, as along with the cameras. And I was absolutely amazed when the answers came pouring in. They were correct. I mean, he gave me my arrival date on the ranch. But I asked him what did I do this morning. He spelled out run, which is what I did. I ran on the ranch every morning for fitness and patrol. My first patrol was I'd run gate to gate to gate to gate. Sometimes the mesa. I asked him when I asked him where I was born, he actually spelled out Germany, and furthermore the town I was born in, which I didn't even ask. So I knew I had a conversation with someone that was genuine. I asked questions, for example, is there good on the ranch? And he would answer yes. I asked him if there's bad on the ranch, and he answered yes. there were a lot of questions, a lot of communication. This session lasted about an hour and a half, and I asked him questions about himself that he answered. For example, if he was a Buffalo Soldier, and he said yes. And it was almost like a fluid conversation. It was something I've never experienced before or ever since. I haven't done that type of stuff once I left the ranch. I don't even know what behooved me to go as far into it as I did, but I did. So after this board session, a couple of rotations down the road, I had a dream that it was like something I remembered when I woke up. It was so clear. There's a rock. There are several boulders in the East Valley nearby where I had always overnighted. They are of similar shape. There are two of them of similar size, and one of them is a larger, almost perfect square. I hiked every place around that boulder to find out where it had broken off the mesa, because it had to come from somewhere. But it was sitting away from the rock wall. It was sitting further into the pasture area of East Valley, and it appeared to have tool marks on it. Of course, I could never really verify that, but to me it looked like tool marks. And it was a perfect square. It was perfect in geometry. It was perfect. Not saying that nature can do that, but it seemed odd to me. So I dreamt in my dream about that rock. And I thought about this, like, I always had a feeling that there was a special meaning or a special energy around that formation of those boulders. Like I said, they're all perfectly square. They are two of them of similar height, and one substantially higher, taller. And so I thought, what could I do? Why do I dream about what could that possibly mean for me? What can I do with this? Because I started taking my dreams as part of my research. I know that sounds different, but since I had opened myself, I figured there is a chance that that would be a way for the entity or entities to communicate through sleep phase. So or trance phase in meditation. So I was barbecuing on the back porch, I always did every night, and I put a part of my steak that I'd been cooking on a different plate. And I thought, you know what? I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to take that out there and see what happens. Put it on the rock as an offering of sorts. I know that sounded out there, but at the same time I had also spoken with several of Ute tribal members. And I had one friend in particular that would often give me some ideas of how to proceed in a local Native American type way. She was actually a shaman, gave me a little pouch of herbal ingredients that she said I needed to wear while on the ranch while doing this, and I did. I wish I would have asked her then what was actually in it. It was herbs and it was rocks and stuff. And so, little gems, turquoise. And so anyways, the next morning, I took the meat, I took bread, and I took water in little bowls and placed them on this rock. I nicknamed it the altar rock because it looked like an altar. And I told her what I had done. I met with her, and she told me that I should be watching to see what happens next. I had no idea. She wouldn't go in detail. She just said, you probably sort of awoken something with this, and see what happens. If anything happens, it should be very, very in your face. And I thought about this, and I was looking for it, and nothing happened. For 3 days, nothing happened. I went to check back on these, on the bread, on the water, and the meat. It was untouched. No, not even birds nibbled on it. It was just sitting there. At the same time, it didn't seem to have like gotten crusty or moldy. It was fresh. It was odd. It didn't age. It seemed like as fresh as it was when I put it there. And it was 3 days. I was in the kitchen. It was about 10 o'clock at night. I was doing dishes, and I felt a very strong presence in the trailer, which wasn't by itself awkward or odd, because there was a presence there most of the time. But this one was strong. So I turned, had my hands in the dishwasher, I mean in the sink, washing dishes, and I turned, and there was an older Native American male that was standing behind the sofa in the living room next to the equipment shelf. He was as clear as me looking at a person, just looking at a person. There was nothing distorted about him. He was perfectly clear, like a real person. And he had black hair with gray streaks. His face looked weathered and wrinkled, but he had the most piercing eyes. He had piercing brown eyes. I mean, those eyes were just very special, very different. He had a blanket over his shoulders, which was yellow, and then it had black designs in it. Different lines and stuff. He wore a shirt that appeared to have been made out of leather, and I could see him all the way to his waist. I couldn't see his legs as they were behind the sofa, covered by the sofa. I don't know how long. I just stared. I mean, I couldn't take my eyes away from him. I just looked and stared at him as he stared at me. I don't know how long this whole thing took. It could have been minutes, it could have been a half hour, I have no clue. It just, time didn't mean anything at this point. It was just, it was a very strange, but it wasn't alarming, it wasn't threatening, I didn't feel any threat, I didn't feel any vibes that were negative. It was just simply like, hey, I am here, I'm looking at you, and you're looking at me type thing. It was very, very, very strange, very comforting in a way. It was not threatening, it was not scary, it was simply like almost an unspoken communication. I felt that it was good, it felt right. And then eventually the image started fading, and he became translucent, and then he was gone. I immediately took my camera, which was sitting on the kitchen table, and started taking probably about 70 or some pictures of the area, seeing if I could identify any residue of what had happened. Because my biggest thing was always, I didn't just want to write a report, I wanted to have evidence. I wanted to show something that went along with my observation, something that could prove it, not just for others, but mostly for myself. Because I didn't want to be one of those that were infected with a ranch fever, where all of a sudden everything became paranormal and everything became something that may have been totally perfectly natural and normal. But I couldn't, there was nothing, I couldn't find any residue of him. And I wrote a report about it, which I still have. And then it was about 3 days after that I was crossing the ranch. I usually went in the mornings, then I went in the afternoons, and then at night. And it was one of those afternoon hikes I did several hours, and I crossed the ranch on the river. I crossed along the river, or I crossed along the dirt road, or the mesa, or a combination of all three. So I was at the West Gate. I was admiring the sunset. It was beautiful. the sun was going down behind the mountains, and there was a large front of black clouds that started popping up, and I was like, oh, they were gonna have a storm tonight. And it was brewing, and there was distant lightning that was up above the mountains. And so I figured it's probably a good time to head back before the storm hits. And I was walking down the dirt road. I had all my 3 dogs, Max, Luca, and William, with me. And all of a sudden I felt that somebody was looking at me. I felt presence again. It was starting to get dark, but it was still good lighting. It was like a twilight type. But it was still pretty light. And I felt that whoever was looking at me was on the mesa. So, I mean, the thing is, after years up there, you start really focusing and sharpening your senses. Your inner senses become alive, and you start paying more attention to senses you wouldn't necessarily living in a city. So I looked up at the mesa where I thought the thing or the person or whoever was looking at me was at. I have no idea what it could have been, but it was a man that stood up there. And he was a tall man. He was just like a man. I mean, nothing special about him. And I looked up and called out to him because I thought maybe it was a trespasser, or maybe it was a rancher that was looking for livestock. Every once in a while they would cross over the mesa on a game trail and then end up in our pasture. So I called up and said, hey, what are you doing up there? What's going on? Who are you? Stuff like that. But he wouldn't answer. He just looked at me, and I looked at him. I mean, we had eye contact. I could not only sense that, I could see it, I could feel it. He had his head angled toward me, and we're looking at one another. And I again called out to him and said, hey, can you answer me? Who are you? What are you doing up there? What's your business here? You know, this is private property, and you're not supposed to be here. And he didn't answer at all. And at that point, the storm was moving in a lot faster than I had anticipated. And I started getting physiological symptoms such as the tingle. The hair would stand up on every part of my body. I mean, not just the neck. I felt like almost like touching a cattle wire. It was that strong. And I knew at that point this was not ordinary. There was something else that was going on. My dogs didn't take any reaction to it, which I thought was strange, but I definitely could sense it. There was something very awkward, something very odd about this situation. And the way he stood all of a sudden didn't seem all that normal to me anymore. He stood differently. He stood almost like without any joint movement. It was very different. And then he turned. I don't know how long the time frame was, maybe 45 seconds, maybe a minute, maybe 2 minutes. And he had, from the time of the initial contact, and he turned perfectly to the east. And at this point, he wasn't looking at me, he was just staring east. And I was pulling out, I had a pair of small size binoculars on me, pulled them out, and I started looking at him through my binoculars. And yeah, he was clearly a man standing there. You could see his arms, his torso, his legs, his head, his hair. I mean, everything. It was just like a man. And then he turned he put his arms out like this. And I was at this point thinking, what is he doing? He was at a very steep part of the mesa. If he had fallen off that part, he would have sustained some heavy injuries, some serious stuff, because they were all like jagged rocks underneath. It was a vertical part of the mesa. It was straight vertical. And he was right at the very edge. And I was thinking, oh my God, if he falls, he's going to kill himself. So he turns, he bends over at the waist after having extended his arms straight. And he starts bending over at the waist. He's not using his knees or anything else. I'm watching this through my binoculars. I mean, not that he was that far away, but I just couldn't stop watching. And essentially, he lost balance. And when his hands touched the ground, I was looking at an animal. I wasn't looking at, the man was gone. There was a canine. There was a wolf. I know what wolves look like. I have been coming across wolves several times in the wild while hunting in the New Mexico-Arizona border area by Magdalena, where there are wolves. I know what wolves look like, and I have actually come across face-to-face with them out in the wild, and there was no doubt to me what that was. I knew what that was. And now the wolf was sitting there where the man had just been, and he's looking at me. He's had his head turned like this. I can see his side profile. I can see his shoulders. I can see his head, his ears, and he turns, not the wolf itself, but just the head. And now he looks at me just like the man had a minute prior. And my mind is racing. I am trying to comprehend what I just saw. And I'm thinking, this is not possible. And yet it happened. So I don't know how long I stood there. I mean, I don't know how long he sat there. Eventually he got up and stood on all fours, and he was big. He was quite a large animal. Very bushy tail, very bushy fur. It was brown or darkish in color, brownish dark in color. And you could sense his eyes. They were piercing. You could see his ears silhouetting. I mean, it was a wolf. And then he started very leisurely. And meanwhile, also, the storm was just about overhead. There was lightning above the mesa. There was lightning all around. There was, the wind had picked up. It started to rain. The wind was to the point where the rain came sideways. It was a nasty storm that moved in. And I also kind of started thinking about lightning strikes, and which there was lightning, so much lightning around me. So he got up, and in the most leisurely type of way, and started walking along the rim of the mesa. I still stood there just watching it. And there was a rock outcrop where he walked behind. I lost sight of him. And meanwhile, the storm got and it hit. So I marked my location with GPS. I marked the approximate location where I had seen him, not only visually by what was right there. There was a rock that was very dominantly sticking out right where he had stood. I marked the vegetation, and then I marked his GPS best I could. I took the nearest immovable object, which was a power pole, and wrote the number of the power pole down on a piece of paper, and started walking back toward the house, which was about 2 miles to the east. And I just was trying to wrap my head around this. As I came close to the house, the front yard, I opened the gate, I looked around, I saw him again. He was sitting next to the old antenna up there where the Shermans had put up a TV antenna that's across from the ranch. You still see the pole sticking up, and the equipment's laying all around. It's like old TV type stuff. But he was sitting right there, and he was watching me as I was watching him. This lasted, and at this point I was drenched, I was soaked, I was soaked like every fiber of me. It was cold, sort of shivering, but I couldn't like get away from it. I just stood there and watched him. Then eventually he got up and he disappeared. He walked straight to the north from where he was at, and I couldn't see him anymore. I walked in the house, and before I even took my wet clothing off, I called my boss, Colin, and reported to him what I had seen. I told him that I know this sounded extremely crazy, and I swore to God I didn't make this up. I didn't fantasize. I didn't. This was not a mind mirage. This happened, and I was happy that he took it as such and didn't like ridicule me like you've been drinking, or he actually believed what I had said, which meant the world to me, because who would believe such a thing? I sat down immediately and started writing every detail as it was fresh in my mind, as the storm was just going out of control outside. And I wondered if he, the wolf, was somewhere nearby watching me through the windows, which I kept all the curtains always open. Next morning, I couldn't really sleep that night. The next morning, I got up first light, took all my investigative gear, measuring tapes, markers, fluorescent spray paint, brown paper bags, spoons, I mean, you name it. I had my go bag always ready to go. I grabbed my go bag and went up there. And the mesa is often, you have different parts where you have, it's rocky, or you got vegetation, and then parts of it are just clay and mud. And it just so happened that where this took place was one of those big mud clay areas. There were many plants there. It was for the most part simply a big clay area. And it had rained a few days prior, so the soil was soft, but I was worried that the storm had destroyed any evidence, if there ever actually was evidence. So as I approached the area, I couldn't believe it. There were actually human tracks that led up to exactly where he stood, and there were canine tracks leading away from where he stood. The area of the clay plate was probably 50 by 30 feet. It was pretty big. It was too big where somebody could have just jumped it, to get back onto the rocky part. He was dead smack in the center of it. And there was just clear as day human prints walking up, and then you could see where he turned, and then you could see the canine tracks walking away. So before I did anything, I took a lot of pictures, photographs of the area, different angles, just different perspectives. After I had done that, I started measuring the tracks as into, like, first the human tracks, the gait. I try to compare weight by my own weight. How far would I sink in? I understood it had rained the night prior, but I would still want to get a ballpark. So the animal was somewhere near around, best I could estimate, about 200 pounds, 180, 200 pounds, somewhere in that vicinity. The human tracks were distinct. They were similar. Each track was similar to the next. The gait was about 35, 38 inches. And then when I got to the canine tracks, I would measure them at about 5.5 inches in width and about 6 inches in length, with a depth of about 1/4 inch into the soil. And so I would start taking detailed pictures with long shutter speeds, different shutter speeds. I used different filters, I used different camera equipment. I started then to take soil samples from especially where the toes would interact with the mud in between the pads itself, the foot pads, where the nails, you could see the nail indentions of the paw, and I would take samples from that area. So I took, for the next couple of hours, I would take soil samples from the human prints, the animal prints, and then I would fan out and would go about 15 feet, started at like 2 feet, 3 feet, taking soil samples of the surrounding area with hopes of finding hair, any kind of liquid, any kind of anything DNA related. The theory is anywhere you go, you bring some, you take some. So I scooped a lot of dirt, like the upper layers, and packaged that into brown paper bags. Then I was, at the end of it all, I would apply a coat of fluorescent orange spray paint, just a light coat over, so it would highlight even more the ridges, the nails, the consistency of the tracks. Took, I don't know, hundreds of photos. And then when I sent them back, I know BAASS sent them to 2 different veterinarians to be analyzed as to what they, in their opinion, had made the tracks. And both, one was in state, one was out of state. And both came back that there was a very high probability, in their opinion, that these were wolf tracks, based on the size, also based on the linear appearance. Most canines, when they're walking offset. Like coyotes, dogs will walk offset. But these tracks were linear, as in putting the rear foot in the front foot type thing. It was a linear line of track, not offset at all. It was linear. I got several pictures with perspective to also the residents, the BAASS housing, the trailer. And so, yeah, in summary, this may have been the most crowning of events, one of the most distinct, one of the most significant things that I have ever been allowed to witness, ever been privileged to witness in my life. Not only do I have still the vivid memory of it, and I can recount it to minute detail, but I also have the evidence. I have the pictures. I have the GPS data. I have the measurements. I dissected that scene as I would a crime scene as an MPI. I have studied investigation for many years. I didn't walk into this as an amateur. I have ran the MPI office out of Bagram for all of southern Afghanistan. I have completed a lot of schooling into crime scene investigation. And I treated each and every scene on the ranch just as that, a crime scene. That's how I approached it. Of course, it was a crime scene, but I would approach it in the same manner as I would approach a crime scene. And so, in summary, this main event had been one that had been built up to, I believe, over many years. It's nothing I just walked into and summoned something. And I still don't know, did I summons it? Did it just choose to show itself? Did I inadvertently cross boundaries that I didn't even know crossing at the time? I contacted a friend who is very studied in alchemy, who is very knowledgeable, much more than I have ever been or probably will be. She is a true subject matter expert. Her name is Ira, and I always have a hard time with that last name of hers, Wolfsnotham. An amazing woman, an amazing antenna, and an amazing person. And she gave me a lot of insight into what may have happened. The more detail I gave her, the more she started correlating it. And I think I've pushed a few doors open without really knowing I did at the time being. As I said in the beginning, there are consequences. You don't do that type of stuff and just walk away from it. There are things that will be, that almost you manifest yourself by dabbling and by going into those realms. And to this day, and I have witnesses to this that are in the same house with me, that hear the same crashes, that wake me up in the middle of the night going, hey, did you hear this? As much as of last week, I was traveling back to Las Vegas, and I was looking for my watch. And I put my watch same place every night, every day on my nightstand. It's always there. I got 3 watches there. They always sit there, and I pick whatever I want to wear that day. And I couldn't find, both other watches were there. This one I wanted to take was not. And I spent an hour and a half looking. I mean, everywhere, through the entire house. I couldn't find it. And then my fiance at some point called me and said, hey, I found your watch. I said, do tell, what was it? It was stuck between 2 mattresses on the bed. And I know I had searched under the bed, I had searched around the bed, I looked at every nook and cranny, and it was not there. I know it sounds, it may sound what it may sound, but the fact is that I didn't place it there. The fact is that it was in a spot that is, who puts a watch between 2 mattresses with part of the wristband sticking out? It's a spot that it couldn't have been. I mean, how would it get there? I know I didn't put it there. It's crazy. But there are a lot of things that have been happening, especially since I've gotten back into this. The more I get back into this, all of a sudden things start happening again. The dreams are there again. The sounds are there again. And all of a sudden, the scents, the smells are there again. We've had a very distinct experience where all of a sudden there was an odor of extremely strong sulfur, unmistakably sulfur, that was surrounding us. There were other phenomena that by themselves maybe not mean a whole bunch, but when you put them together, and especially with the background of these are the same ones that were at the ranch. And we are, about 200 miles, 150 miles from the ranch. Our current house is about 150 miles west of the ranch. But we are starting experiencing ranch phenomena more and more. The more we actually go into this, the more we are focusing on this again, the more we are talking to people about this. Now, it's not threatening, it's not heebie-jeebie type stuff. It's something where you just started taking notice. And so, yeah, we're taking notice, and we are far from being done. We're going back in the basin, and we're conducting interviews with people there, and see what happens.
So what are your plans for the future?
It's interesting that none of this had been planned. I never thought that I would find myself sitting behind your camera and talking about this. To me, it had been an issue that was complete, that was close to my heart, but it was done. It was history. And so, since apparently it's not, I would like to further awareness as far as for people that may have never been exposed to the ranch or are coming into this whole field for the first time. I would like to further awareness that there are a lot of people out there that are hyping the story, and through dramatization, through threat levels and threat cells, I would like to portray it in a real, in a honest, in a realistic and truth-based manner. And I've been invited to speak at a few conferences. I will carry my message there. I hope I can reach people that may have had a wrong picture of the place. I would like to engage in dialogue with people that have questions, real questions. I don't have a problem answering individual questions. As a matter of fact, if I can get the message out there that the ranch is not a man-eating, PTSD-causing, man-eating monster.
Portal to hell.
It's a what?
Portal to hell. As
Yeah,
we've
it is
heard from...
not a portal to hell. It's not. There is a lot of Native American mythology woven into the place. There are a lot of different entities, and it's not a portal to hell. It is not. How did somebody phrase that? It was a man-eater, physically and mentally. It is not. I've spent 6 years there. I'm pretty okay, I think. It hasn't eaten me. As a matter of fact, it has enriched me. It has enlightened me. It has given me visions of things that I probably haven't had prior. It gave me a different perspective on things. There's a lot to be learned. There's a lot to be researched, and there's a lot to be documented. And the danger I see is that the more we get commercial filmmaking companies or TV channels on there and in the area, their business is to sell, their business is to make profit, to cover the cost that they put out and make profit. I mean, that's what it's all about, making profit. I would love to see, maybe be behind or be part of a team of the old guard of people that used to work the ranch, like scientists, like Dr. Eric Davis, for example, who had profound experiences on the place, way different than mine, but even more traumatic. People that actually were there when the portal opened, that actually filmed it. Why is he not being part of a real research? And a lot of this is people that still hold reputable jobs and are in the scientific community don't want to, can't afford to speak out because they are being trolled. I mean, for crying out loud, the amount of trolls that come out and ridicule, the ones that have their set opinions, that follow certain people, it has become a cult of personality. It has become a cult of income, has become a cult of career building on nothing other than third-party information that is being regurgitated and once more regurgitated. I mean, there's even there are tours being sold around the ranch for profit, and it's pathetic. What I want to do in the future is I would like to somehow be able to further the research into and witnessing into not just the ranch but the whole basin, to talk to people that may not have an outlet, to listen to their stories, to try to, if I can be of assistance or Ira can be, to answer questions, just to portray the place in the way that it should be portrayed, that will set the record straight when it comes to all the blood, guts, and terror, and to give the ranch the dignity and respect that it deserves as a very sacred place. And I think that is the mission that I will be carrying forward. I have, like I said earlier on, some other friends that I worked the ranch with, sometimes on the same team, that are now coming forward, that are also interested in taking the place, to give it its proper respect, to not gut it for a quick dollar and glory and headlines and opinion making. There are beautiful things that are happening there, and I want to continue to witness them, to document them the best I can, not just visually, but also scientifically the best I can. I'm not a scientist. I'm an investigator, and I'm a good witness, and that's what I want to do, and preserve that aspect of it, and put it out there, and then people can make their own opinion about it. I don't want to opinion form. I want to inform, and that's my hopes going forward. This is what I want to do, and since I came back from retirement, that is where I'm going to focus on, and that is where hopefully the road goes. That's where the path hopefully will lead towards. And with that being said, I appreciate you guys watching this. If you have any questions, you can contact me, either through the YouTube channel or through Erica Luke's Facebook page, and we will answer whatever it is that you might have questions about, stuff I may have left out or I need to explain better. I'm not a professional in this. It's been years since I've been behind the camera. This is my first interview on camera. So yeah, I wish for the best, and I'll see you guys later.
Well, thank you for your bravery coming forward, because as you know, this community has been terrorized, and lots of false beliefs have been put into the narrative, and that's a very dangerous thing, and we have a responsibility as community members to make sure that that doesn't happen, and to also offer a support system.